The Lucasfilm animation anthology series is back for Tales of the Empire with 6 new episodes about 2 Imperial characters, Morgan Elsbeth and Barriss Offee. Join us as we dive into part 2 of this animated passion project.
Welcome to Skytalkers. Here are your hosts, Charlotte and Caitlin.
Hello and welcome to Skytalkers. I'm your host, Charlotte.
Hey everyone, I'm your other host, Caitlin, and welcome to this episode where we're talking all about Tales of the Empire, which is part 2, I guess we can call it, of the Tales series. We had Tales of the Jedi that came out in 2022, and now we have Tales of the Empire coming out in 2024. And I'm so excited to talk about these. Tales of the Jedi was an incredible project, passion project, I think is how we kind of have been describing it from Dave Filoni. And the Tales of the Jedi panel at Celebration 2022, I think was one of our favorite panels.
I think it was our favorite.
I
think in our ranking, we ranked it as our favorite because it was so surprising. We had no idea what the deal was. And this is a really fun May the 4th Star Wars Day surprise. I don't think a month ago we knew that this was coming out. First off.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew that we were getting a sequel to Tales of the Jedi, but we didn't know it was Tales of the Empire, and just the continuation of Lucasfilm Animation doing 6-part shorts, I think are so cool. And I feel really lucky to have them.
Yeah, I completely love the setup of these 2 characters that we get to kind of compare and contrast. And I'm really excited actually now that we have this second installment in this series to talk about the ways that, Dooku and Ahsoka made sense as a pair in Tales of the Jedi, and now Morgan and Barriss, how they make sense as a pair in Tales of the Empire. I really love the structure of Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire. So what's next? Tales of the Bounty Hunter, Tales of...
it feels likely.
Right?
Or Sith.
Yeah, it could be Tales of the Sith. Who else could we do? Tales of the Politician? Tales of the Senator?
Let's not. I don't... That's giving snooze.
I'm saying it could be... What if it's like a Padme and...
All right, I'm in. Say less.
What if it's Padme and... what is her name? Lux's mother. Because they're separatists.
Oh, I love her. Bonteri.
Yeah. Nina, right? Mina Bonteri. Yeah, because, she was a separatist. Padme was with the Republic. That would be an interesting compare contrast, but they were kind of on...
I actually think it might be more interesting, sorry to interrupt you, to compare Padme and Palpatine as 2 Naboo senators.
That's very true. Okay, you said snooze fest, but I'm very invested.
I'm in. So anyway, the possibilities are actually endless. I do think that Tales of the Sith feels more likely,
more
and so does Tales of the Bounty Hunter.
Than Tales of the Senator.
Yeah, or just the Senate. Like, I don't know. It's a tough PR style, I guess.
Kind of is.
But very excited to be talking about this today. And happy May the 4th, as you're probably listening to this on Star Wars Day. If you're not, and the time has passed, hope 2024 Star Wars Day was a great Star Wars Day for you. At the time of recording, we're recording this on April 28th. We got screeners for this. Very excited for the world to watch this. Caitlin and I are actually in San Francisco for some special things, and we'll be posting about our trip in San Francisco on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter. So if you're interested in following along, definitely check that out because we'll be posting there, and we're going to have a lot of coverage from that as well coming soon.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be... We're recording this on a Sunday, and our trip is this week. And the amount of Star Wars things that we have to do this week is overwhelming.
In a good way.
No, absolutely in a good way. But I'm looking at my, in my planner, I've got my life to-do list, my work to-do list, Skytalkers to-do list, and the Skytalkers to-do list, it just keeps growing. But it's all very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all very exciting, fun things. And you'll be hearing a lot from us this week, I think.
You probably have already heard from us twice, I think. So this is
Please shut up.
Yeah, literally.
But I'm really excited to start talking about Tales of the Empire. So let's get started. In part 1, we're going to do our general reaction and overview.
In part 2, we're talking about the Morgan Elsbeth episodes.
And in part 3, we're going to be talking about the Barriss Offee episodes.
So without further ado, let's get started.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first?
All right, welcome to part 1, where we're kind of going over our general reaction and overview. This is a very similar structure to when we covered Tales of the Jedi. And when Charlotte and I were talking about our discussion for Tales of the Empire, we thought it might actually be a good idea to kind of revisit some of the things that Dave Filoni said back in 2022 at that panel at Celebration Anaheim to kind of remind us of the foundations of this project and kind of where it came from and some of the things that he was talking about at that time. You know, of course, he was talking about Tales of the Jedi with Dooku and Ahsoka, but I think there's a lot that is still applicable here, and obviously, you know, something that he wanted to continue doing. So these are some quotes I just pulled from that panel, and we can talk about them. He said, quote, "I wanted to explore some characters and really set some things down on them from things I've thought of over the years," which I think that this is really true probably about, especially a character like Barriss. Morgan is a little bit of a newer character, but I think he's definitely been saving Barriss for something really cool.
Well, I think even with Morgan, I think that when you introduce a character like Morgan, I think from Dave's perspective, I'm sure he had a loose backstory about her for a while.
Yeah.
In the same way that I think that Barriss's fate has been a question mark / he has, I'm pretty sure in the past 10 years at least, he has been like, you have not seen the last of Barriss. And that gave a lot of people hope in terms of her story. So yeah, you're so right that like he's been thinking about that for a while. It's very,
he's been saving her.
Exactly.
And then this quote I thought was really good to kind of think about the ways that Dave and Lucasfilm Animation were trying to tell this story. Now, this quote starts off about Ahsoka, but it'll go into kind of the overall tone of Tales of the Jedi and then Tales of the Empire here. So Dave says, some key things to know about her, meaning Ahsoka. So I told 3 tales that span a long portion of her life. George used to call these types of stories tone poems, experimenting with very minimal dialogue and expression, just trying to use the visuals to communicate the imagery and story points. And I think that this is still very applicable to Tales of the Empire. We've got, you know, large swaths of time that we're covering with both Morgan and Barriss. And I think they're still really playing with this idea of minimal dialogue and using the visuals and expressions of characters to really carry the story, which, as we know, this was part of George's kind of overall vision for Star Wars from the very beginning, that you would be able to understand the story just from the visuals and the music. You wouldn't even necessarily need the dialogue all the time.
Yeah, totally. I think my mind was blown a little bit when Dave introduced Tales of the Jedi as an exploration into the characters akin to the tone poems that we actually became familiar with the Phantom Menace and the ads around the Phantom Menace. If you don't know what we're talking about, definitely Google Phantom Menace tone poems, and they provide insight into the characters of the Phantom Menace that you might not have had before. And I think that's the same structure that we get from these shorts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of one of the last quotes I wanted to pull from that 2022 panel, just because I remember at the time thinking, is this a Skytalkers quote? Did he just say something that we would say on our show? And Dave said, "I don't know what kind of stories I'm known for. I hope they're happy. They get happy in the end. Not going to be happy if you don't overcome something along the way, possibly tragic." And of course, here on Skytalkers, we say Star Wars is tragedy a lot. And just because he said the word tragic doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it meant everything to us.
I think we were like, woo, when you said that. Like, no one else was.
He also said, he also talked about putting stories on the shelf as well. I remember he said that. And we say all the time about putting, you know, a completed Star Wars story on the shelf. So we were like, yeah.
Reeling. Like ascending into a different plane of existence, for sure.
Yeah. But at Celebration London in 2023, at the 15 Years of Clone Wars panel, this is when Dave announced that a season 2 of Tales of the Jedi was coming. And of course, at the time, we did not know that it was Tales in the Empire. But he had this to say. It was at the very end of the panel where he said, Tales of the Jedi was so fun, I decided to do some more. What's become apparent to me is that there is a very important thing the Jedi have to do, which is they have to pass on what they have learned. And so, though I have gotten progressively busy in other aspects, I do take time to teach all of my young Padawans in animation. So I'm using Tales of the Jedi and I'm telling some stories, and I'm giving some people there an opportunity to step up and direct, step up and write, step up and try to learn the ways of the Force as George taught me, as I will hopefully teach them, so Lucas Animation will be strong for years and years to come. And that's what we're going to do. So I think that was a really interesting setup to Tales of the Empire. Charlotte and I were kind of talking about this at the beginning. It feels like a lot of the directors and writers of Tales of the Empire are people we've seen before that have directed and written for other Star Wars projects, especially right now, or what just ended. We haven't seen the finale yet, but the Bad Batch that just ended. So these are kind of some familiar names to us already. So I hope we get to hear more about this kind of mentorship that the Tales of the Jedi series is kind of setting up. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks and months, we'll be learning what's coming next from Lucasfilm Animation as well. And what this quote from Dave and, seeing some of these names that we're very familiar with in Star Wars animation, like Nate Villanueva, Stuart Lee, Matt Miknovitz, Amanda Rose Munez, it just reminds me, and we talked about this in the Bad Batch and some of our Bad Batch coverage, that I would love to hear from these people. Some of these people
Seriously.
have actually been in the Star Wars world for a really long time, and they're not on like the press tours. They're not really giving interviews in the same way that some of the like head writers and like someone like Dave is often doing. And I just think they've become such a part of the fabric of Star Wars animation that I would love to hear about their creative process and what it is about Star Wars that keeps them coming back to this franchise and wanting to work in it. So I hope we're able to hear from some of these people in the future.
Yeah, totally. I feel like back with the Clone Wars, we heard from individual writers a lot more. And now I feel like we've kind of moved away from that. And just like Caitlin said, they're not on the press tours. And it's sort of like when you start tracking all the different writers for the Bad Batch and Rebels, like we do during our show notes, we notice basically 3 or 4 of the same names, but they are not sort of household Star Wars names.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of crazy because they should be, because they're writing these episodes that we're hailing as some of the best Star Wars ever. And it's just kind of surprising. We'd really love to hear from them is the point of this. And even if it's in an article, maybe not an interview or something, like we'd love that. I think that we really would.
Yeah.
So Caitlin, all of that behind us, what did you think of Tales of the Empire?
I think it was a much darker story than Tales of the Jedi, which kind of makes sense. Of course, it's called Tales of the Empire. I gotta say, while I enjoyed Morgan's story a lot, Barriss's just absolutely blew me away.
Same.
I had watched it before you had gotten to it, before you had watched it actually, and I remember texting you after like halfway through episode 5, which would have been the second episode in Barriss's half, and telling you this is so dark. And then we of course get to the end of episode 5, which is essentially Barriss's redemption, and we move into episode 6, which is insane with Healer Barriss, the wise mother. And my mind was just so blown. I couldn't even text you about it until you had actually watched it and had seen for yourself. It was crazy. I think that I'm really excited for you to talk about kind of the structure of Tales of the Empire, because I think it puts the whole series in a new light for me when I was kind of thinking about it as a whole. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to talk about kind of the comparison between Morgan and Barriss and the setup of them as our two main characters.
When you said R2, I heard R2D2. Just saying. Okay, so for me, I love Tales of the Empire too. The second part was so dark, and I just really like this animation style too. It's just gorgeous. And I think the music was fantastic. I really enjoyed this. And I think it is so digestible in these 11-minute, 15-minute shorts. I definitely prefer the Barriss one more than the Morgan Elsbeth one, but that doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy the Morgan Elsbeth one. I think when we dive into the section about her, we can expand on this a little bit more. But I will say that I sort of struggled a little bit with the through line of her story, like the question of like why revisit this part of her story? What does it show us in what we've already seen before? And I think I've gotten there in terms of that structure, but it was not immediately apparent to me in the same way that the Barriss story was, which felt so laid out. But then also it's interesting to think about how, like we said this just a few minutes ago, that Dave has probably been thinking about this story with Barriss for a really long time and had less time to think about the Morgan story. And it's just interesting to see how that has all worked out.
Yeah, I think one thing that is kind of very apparent of a difference between Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire is Tales of the Jedi went chronologically. So we started with Ahsoka's episode, remember, and then we did 3 Dooku episodes and then 2 Ahsoka episodes, which I remember being very surprised at when we were watching Tales of the Jedi. It was in chronological order with the events as they were happening in the galaxy. Whereas here in Tales of the Empire, it was split up by character, which I thought was a really interesting difference between the 2 seasons, and kind of thinking about why we would choose to go that route this time with Tales in the Empire. And you actually, like, I think perfectly unwrapped what this structure was for Tales of the Empire and why it makes sense here to have it split by character rather than going in chronological order this time.
Yeah, before I dive into that, I just want to say I actually think I like the 3 episodes about one character, 3 episodes about one character versus what the like very deliberate choice of Tales of the Jedi did with their going chronologically. I think that Star Wars is, I don't know, I feel like I've sort of given up on caring about the chronological stuff. Like it's always going to be difficult for me now, and I don't know if like we need to do it that way, you know?
Yeah.
And so putting them together makes us focus a little bit more on the characters themselves, which maybe has us not compare them as much as we were comparing them, like comparing Ahsoka and Dooku, 2 fallen Jedi, in Tales of the Jedi. And maybe this, like the comparison's a little less. But the thing that made me understand the structure a little bit more is I felt like we were setting up a divine comedy type metaphor with Morgan's story and Barriss's story, meaning if you think about the 3 parts of the Divine Comedy by Dante, you have Inferno, you have Purgatorio, and then you have Paradiso. So you have hell, purgatory, and heaven. And I think that Morgan's entire descent into darkness, and you can see that by the titles, is her descending into hell, and it's the Inferno structure of the Divine Comedy. And then Barriss's Inquisitor era is basically the purgatory of it all, where she is sort of writhing around in this choiceless world. And then when she does actually get to make the choice to run, she experiences paradise by embracing radical love and healing in paradise, right? And then that's her ending, her redemption. And just thinking about these 6 tales as the structure of a descent and then a rise was really helpful for me to kind of sink my teeth in understanding the point behind showing the shorts that we got with Morgan, if that makes sense. And we can dive deeper into this, but I felt like this morning I texted you when we were rewatching. So when Caitlin and I do any sort of podcast episode, we watch everything, the new stuff, at least twice, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times. But in our rewatch era this morning, I was like, I'm really trying to figure this out because I think I need to figure out the stuff with Morgan a little bit better. I was rewatching old episodes of Ahsoka. I was just, again, trying to sink my teeth into it. And then when it was revealed that there's a character whose name is literally Dante in episode 4 of the first part of Barriss's story, I was like, okay, this is pretty obvious. I guess they're really doing this. So let's think about this in this structure. And again, I don't know if they really meant to do that, but it doesn't really matter to me. I think that it's easier for me to understand the descent and then the rise in the framework of the Empire and like the stories around the Empire and getting out of the Empire, being sucked into the Empire, being sucked into these systemic structures. Or yeah, I feel like it was an easier format for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I think when you were kind of breaking this down when we were texting about it, I was thinking, yeah, this makes a lot more sense to me, thinking about the structure and even thinking about the reasons why we would pick Morgan and Barriss here for Tales of the Empire. The comparison between Dooku and Ahsoka, I think, really tickled me in Tales of the Jedi. And it wasn't a pair that I had thought a lot about, but through that show, I feel like I had a greater appreciation for the comparison between both of them as lost Jedi and their respective paths after they left the Order. And then here we have kind of something similar. But Morgan and Barriss just seem so far apart, right? Like Dooku and Ahsoka operated within the same environment in a lot of ways with the Jedi Order, whereas Morgan and Barriss, I definitely couldn't see the connection between them, especially knowing as little as we did about Barriss after the events of the Clone Wars. But I think that thinking about this structure of Dante's Inferno and the descent into hell and purgatory, redemption, and heaven, paradiso, I think it makes a lot more sense because we see someone like two people working within the constructs of the Empire, one who descends deeper and deeper, and one who, is at the bottom of the pit, I would say, but then finds a way to go on a different path out of it into paradise. I think there's something really interesting, specifically in Barriss's half, where there are things that she does. It's the same action, but she does it for good, for the light side or for the dark side. And this idea that it's not so much about the action, but about the intention of the character. And, it often makes me think of that line too of, there's a thin line between love and hate, and there's a thin line between good and bad a lot of the times when we're talking about morality in Star Wars. And I think we see that play out in a lot of different stories. And so I think that having both of these characters be within the Empire and take very different paths, I thought was, on reflecting on Tales of the Empire, I think was a really compelling choice to have these two.
Agreed. Okay, let's jump into talking about Morgan Elsbeth's story. Welcome to part 2, where we're talking about the first 3 episodes of Tales of the Empire that are all dealing with Morgan Elsbeth's story.
So we have the first 3 episodes, which are entitled The Path of Fear, The Path of Anger, and The Path of Hate, which if you're a Star Wars fan, you should be picking up on a pattern here. You should be saying, where have I heard this before? And of course, it is the outline that Yoda says, which is fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And, when we're thinking, we've been talking about structure here, it does feel like they took that quote and made it the structure of Morgan's half of the story and kind of in a smaller way, because by the end of these 3 episodes, we have suffering, widespread suffering of the people, continued widespread suffering of the people of Corvus. So these titles really follow that path, that descent into hell, and it's to the dark side. And I really like the idea of taking this quote about the dark side, a Force user, but applying it to someone like Morgan that is not a Jedi or a Sith. Of course,
But
she's a
does
witch.
She's a witch. So she does have
witch.
the Force, but she's witchy.
Yeah, there's the witchy Force. So it's a little bit different, which I appreciate. I always like when we're talking about the Force, but it's not always in the straight Jedi and Sith terms. But this first episode is when we kind of go back to where Morgan starts down her path, which is with the destruction of Dathomir, and Grievous is here. So episode 1 is The Path of Fear. It's directed by Nate Villanueva, story by Dave Filoni, and written by Amanda Rose Muniz. But we start on Dathomir, and we're dropped right in the middle of the battle where all the battle droids, the Separatists, are destroying everything in their way. And Grievous is there, and he kills Morgan's mother, and everyone else is also destroyed. But Morgan is saved by the people of the Mountain Clan, and we're kind of seeing her descent on this path of fear and how she starts to take other people on this path of fear too. And I thought this was such a fascinating episode because I found myself with a lot of sympathy for Morgan by the end of it, because, you know, there are these other young kids that are here in the Mountain Clan, and they've seen what has happened to Morgan and Morgan's people, that she's the only one left. And they keep asking the matron, the mother, you know, will this happen to us? What's wrong with being prepared? And I don't think there's anything wrong with those questions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with Morgan, you know, at face value, offering to tell them how to protect themselves, because, you know, what does the matron say? You know, her daughter Nolly is asking if she says, do you think the droids will leave us alone? And the matron responds, as long as we leave them alone. But I think us as the audience know that that's not really true for the Empire, or for the Separatists, what will become the Empire. They just take and take and take until there's nothing left. And I don't know. I was curious to kind of talk about this episode with you, because while I know what Morgan's path eventually is, it's hard to look at her in this episode to see everything she's lost and to not understand why she would want to further protect herself.
See, I think that the sympathy that we feel for her is by design, but like every action she takes sort of cements herself in what we eventually learn is her driving force, which is revenge. We find that out in a few episodes later when Thrawn is questioning her. And I think I realized that on the second watch, honestly, of the fact that from the moment she wakes up, instead of being super thankful that she found the Mountain Clan and is... I didn't get that sense of like gratefulness from her.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Instead, it's very selfish of how can I seek revenge? And yeah, I will drag these other people with me because it's about protection for them, I suppose. But really, for her story and her story of what she's like crafting in her brain, it is about revenge for her clan, right? And I think that we have seen the story of the person from the outside helps the peaceful clan to defend themselves against a greater force, right? We've seen it. We've seen it in The Mandalorian. I think it's in Hidden Fortress. Like, it's a very much a Star Warsism, and it's a very like, it's something that we see all the time. This is not that story. This is instead I just described is a selfless, everyone can protect themselves if I show you how. And what happens with Morgan in this case is a selfish, I need to have revenge. And her mistakes catch up with her because the people that she drags along with are like, we start off with a mother dying in this episode and we end with a daughter dying. That ending where the daughter dies is due to Morgan's own hubris and her obsession with revenge, to the point where the mother is like, your path is set. You have let her, what's the line? It's so good. Do not give your fears such fertile ground to take root. By the end of this, her fears have taken root, and it's all about revenge for her. And she doesn't really learn from this.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of foreshadowing of what's to come, especially from the matron, because at the end she says, it appears your path is set. Morgan Elsbeth, I pity you, for I can see what is to come. And this is something that we kind of see Morgan also talking about later in episode 3, that she can see a path ahead of her, a great destiny. And yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And I like how you brought up the selfless versus selfish, as far as someone coming in and teaching a group of people how to protect themselves, because that is a selfless action. But seen here, it's a selfish action from Morgan. And while it's understandable that her grief could come out, her response to her grief is one of anger and fear. I don't think that's uncalled for necessarily, given everything that's happened to her. She wasn't able to have any kind of gratitude for her life, and she wasn't able to see a way off of that path. And it feels like at the end of it too, the matron understands that there isn't a way off of this path for Morgan, that it is set for her. And we continue to see that proves to be true, right? Yeah, Morgan stays on this path for forever.
I don't mean to interrupt you, and I'm so sorry. I just have to say it because I feel like on this show I've been a broken record before about how I don't love when characters are like, your path is set. because I think that what particularly the story that we are watching actually says is that your path is not set. You can always choose to make the other choice. And I think we see that in the final episode of Tales of the Empire. Excited to talk about that. But for here, I think what we are getting is the mother saying, you set your path by
The choices you make.
the choices you made here. Like, you were selfish, you were filled with revenge. And if you continue to take these steps, your path, like, that's what it's going to be. It's going to end in destruction. And ultimately that's what happens to her, right? I feel like you can look at this episode in particular and think about it as sort of a metaphor for her future life. Like, her mom gets murdered, then she gets rescued by a similar clan who are ready to help her, but instead of accepting, she gets them sucked into like a futile plot for revenge that doesn't work. And she turns to weapons as a savior for her own fear. And then she gets another daughter in like another witch daughter killed in this pursuit. You can think about this as a metaphor for her life and how that actually happens to herself too, where she turns to weapons eventually to fuel her revenge, and she gets involved in Thrawn and everything, and it gets her all the way to the region where she finds Ahsoka. And then in that sort of lust for revenge, even when she gets overtaken by the shadow and regains her witch identity, it doesn't work because she's using everything is so based in revenge for the past, and it's targeted at the wrong people too.
Yeah, I think that was part of, thinking about how we were kind of struggling a little bit with Morgan's story and like not the point of it, but I don't know. It kind of sucks to see this character fall deeper and deeper down the path of the dark side like this, because it's different than a character like Vader, like Anakin and his descent into hell, his descent into darkness. And I think what you were saying about, we don't always like to hear that characters have their path set, because the idea is that redemption is available to pretty much everyone in the story
At all times.
Yeah. But I think it's also important to see someone follow the path down, and especially knowing where Morgan's character goes, that is kind of set as well, right? We have her endpoint actually. So we know she either is redeemed and then falls again, or that's not her path. So there's also that story component to it as well to consider.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that there is an element, not an element, I feel like it is the element actually, of identity when it comes to Morgan Elsbeth's story, and how the revenge is driven by wanting to get revenge over the like wiping out of her identity, her witch clan and everything. But again, just to sort of repeat what I was saying, I think she goes about it like all the wrong ways. And in the end, it suffers, right?
I think this does kind of lead us into The Path of Anger, episode 2, which was directed by Stuart Lee, story by Dave Filoni, also written by Amanda Rose Muniz. And what you were saying, Charlotte, about the revenge and like her identity, she does actually talk about this in The Path of Anger at the end of the episode, actually, when she's having this conversation with Thrawn. And Thrawn talks about how, she lied when she was asked earlier by Captain Pelion about why do you seek Imperial favor? And when she was asked by Captain Pelion at the beginning of the episode, Morgan said, oh, well, of course it's for the glory of the Empire. And Thrawn knows, of course, that she's lying. And Thrawn asks again, why do you seek Imperial favor? And Morgan responds, revenge. Years ago, my people were all but destroyed. Our culture, our beliefs are fading into memory. Yes, I seek power to secure my future, to destroy my enemies. My anger gives me strength, and it is that strength that I offer the Empire. So it is all about revenge, but there is this identity crisis because the witches of Dathomir, their culture and beliefs are gone. And we see this at the very beginning of episode 1, actually, when the facial markings on Morgan's face disappears. And the matron says something about, the magic of the Night Sisters is broken. And that's why the facial markings disappear. And we actually get to see in the Ahsoka show, when those markings return, just how meaningful it is to Morgan. And so it's cool to kind of see her in this headspace here, knowing how important it's going to be to her. Like she achieved that goal, right? Of having that identity given back to her as being recognizable, I guess is maybe the right word, as a Dathomiri witch with those facial markings on her again. I thought this episode, I was surprised to be back. I was actually surprised that both of these episodes took place on Corvus, I'll be honest. But to kind of see her influence over this planet and kind of everything that happens with the Empire, how she becomes involved with Thrawn, which I'll say here at the beginning, I've never been a Thrawn girl, but I'm a Tales of the Empire Thrawn girl.
Yes. They knew what they were doing. They did.
He's never done it for me, but I kind of get it now.
Oh, okay. Since we're here, why is Rook in this? I think if you're a longtime listener, you know I cannot stand this character. They remodeled him. I will say, everyone looks a little different than they do in Rebels, of course. It's a different animation style, but I think I audibly said, "Oh boy."
He came on the screen, and I was like, "Rook, is that you?"
Correct.
My guy, what are you doing here?
No, in no way is he my guy. I think that but I will say, loved the fight between Morgan and Rook. And I was reminded how cool it is when they're fighting on Corvus on top of the wall with the gong, being blared. Like, it's really cool when that happens. And it was cool when the fighting with Ahsoka happened as well. But yeah, I was like, wow, Rook is here. In Tales of the Empire, like, of course. And I think that to the thread of identity being something so important to Morgan, it makes sense that would be woven in Thrawn's story, because Thrawn has always been so interested in that sort of driving point for people. He found it interesting with Hera. He found it interesting with Sabine. And like the concept of like a villain who is really interested in unique cultures has always been so intriguing. And that's another reason why Thrawn is a great villain. So of course it makes sense that she would be, in Thrawn's pocket, basically, because this is the kind of thing that Thrawn really respects and wants to lift up.
Yeah, the first thing he says to her is, "History remembers the witches of Dathomir," which is all she wants. You know, she wants people to know what happened to them, and she wants revenge for what happened to them. So we do start this episode in an Imperial meeting where, I'm not going to pretend to know these ships, guys. I'm so sorry.
Well, the thing that we do know, and because I remember, yes, is season 3, I think, of Rebels. They were introduced as, those they're basically like TIE fighters.
Okay, yeah.
They were new into Rebels. I know you remember that because they did a whole
there was
thing
a lot
about
they did
like the
a lot
marketing.
Of the ship and the ship factories. And
yeah. So it's intriguing that she's the one that is driving the concept for that, even though the Empire here doesn't buy it, but that they eventually do. So it's interesting that Thrawn is the one that greenlights it from her sort of individually. And again, this just plays into why Thrawn is such a good villain, is because the Empire as a whole doesn't reward individualism, but Thrawn sees the greater picture and wants to do that, I guess. Of course, it's for selfish reasons that we see later, but that is a key part of Thrawn's story.
Well, Thrawn is the epitome of the devil is in the details, and this is basically what he tells Morgan when he comes to Corvus, is that people in the Empire at higher levels are kind of so obsessed with the big picture that they don't notice the foundation cracking. They don't see these little, these cracks happening throughout at the smallest level. And if you don't pay attention to the small ones, they're just going to grow into bigger ones. And so at that, it does have to be at an individual level. And I think he's talking about the people that you choose to bring into the Empire, as well as the growing rebellion at this point, which Morgan points out is something that she sees that Thrawn wants her to help with, is the growing rebellion. I do think it's kind of crazy that Morgan, I guess, designed these ships and like the shields. Like, okay.
Yeah, we didn't spend enough time on that she's like kind of a science brain.
Woman of STEM?
Yeah, seriously, woman of STEM. Like,
all right, great.
Okay, so do you actually think she is, or do you think that she had someone do that for her and exploited that
No,
person and then
I
presented it
I
herself?
kind of think she did because she says that they don't, because her pitch to the people of Corvus is that she was going to uh petition or pitch this idea to the Empire, and they would come and build the factories on Corvus, and the people there would get to work in the factories to build her idea, and then they would all have wealth and prosperity. But
Right.
and she tells them when she comes back, she says, what does she say? I didn't write it down, but she's basically like, they don't want your work or my ideas. So I do think she designed them. I'll give her that.
Okay. All right. Again, it's a driving for revenge, though. All of it
Oh
is
yeah.
driven for revenge.
Yeah.
There's
I
nothing selfless about it.
I wonder if there was a moment where she tried to see herself as a part of these people, given her quote in the middle of this of they're all willing to turn on me after everything I've done for them. These are
Mm,
not my people. How could they ever be? I wonder if there was a period when she was, magistrate in the beginning that she tried to what's like be more benevolent or to really
right.
see herself as a part of this community in a more meaningful way. But of course, as soon as things start to go south, what Wing says, what does he say? Like, there's a price for failure too. I'm kind of
Yeah.
like, okay. I thought that was a good line. But they immediately turn on her and
Hmm.
everything kind of goes down from there.
Yeah, I guess she does remember people in the town on an individual level. Like later, she remembers Nadura,
Yeah.
who was young, I guess, in the town. And so I think that you're picking at something that maybe I would have really liked to see. But I
Hmm.
guess that's just to my point about like this is her
It's
descent into
only
hell.
revenge. Yeah.
Like it's really only revenge. Like we're not going to see those flickers of like, oh, her path could have changed, because I think from that first episode we find out that no, like this is where she's going. We know her ending from being a Star Wars fan. So maybe that's true, and maybe that quote that you just read about like, oh, they're willing to turn on me after everything I've done with them is enough for us to just say what we just did, right? About like, oh, she might have had some doubts, but no, she charges ahead
Hmm.
selfishly.
Yeah, she does. I was glad to see Wing in these episodes because he's
Hmm.
in The Mandalorian as well. And it was cool to see him in this episode have he's still in a position of leadership and influence when we see him later in live action, but you definitely see him with a lot more hope, and that I think is important because in the path of hate he has changed a lot in that time as well. He's closer, I think, in personality and demeanor, I guess I should say, to when we see him in live action in The Mandalorian, of filled with a lot of fear and regret about what has happened. I think here in the path of anger he still has, in a weird way, hope, that well, in the beginning of the episode, but by the end, when he says, when all the villagers are watching the battle on top between Morgan and Rook, and they see the conversation happening with Thrawn, and they say, what does it mean? Is it good? And Wing says, no, it means she's won. And he knows he kind of sees the writing on the wall that now that the Empire is here and Morgan is still in control, there is kind of no more hope for them. And that's really the headspace we see him in the path of hate as well.
Totally. I really like his character, and I like the actor who plays him.
Hmm.
And they really did a good job of animating his like super kind face. I really liked that.
Yeah.
Also, before we move on to the path of hate, I wanted to say that the matte paintings in the beginning of this and the animation of
Oh,
Coruscant is just like so
so
freaking good.
it was so crisp.
Yeah,
It was
so
so
crisp, but then
crisp.
also like painterly with
Mhm.
the way that Coruscant looks. It's just gorgeous. This animation style is slightly different than the Bad Batch and slightly different than the Clone Wars, but more obviously aligned with that versus like say Rebels and Resistance. But I feel like I really, really like it, and I like the concept. And I know that some people don't love this, but I like the concept of Lucasfilm animation having a set style that we are aware of and is easily recognizable. I think Pixar has that. Like most animation houses do that. And I think Star Wars continues to refine their quote unquote animation style. And this is as good as it gets, it's so perfect.
I would love to see a 2024 Rebels style, what is
Yeah.
the next iteration of the Rebel style too? Because I mean, I think this animation style is of course gorgeous.
Yeah, I think that's like their A-type style is sort of what I'm saying. Is like
Yeah.
this is their what it if you go to Lucasfilm Animation for a project, this is the type of style that they would emulate.
Mhm.
But I know what you're saying, that like it would be kind of nice to see
The
Rebels in
next
sort of an
the next
updated
level.
style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll also say while we're talking about animation here that you mentioned this with Wing, but it looks just like the actor who plays Wing. And then Morgan looks just like Diana Lee Inosanto too. And I don't know, sometimes I'm like, wow, they
They
that
really
really
did
looks
that.
like her.
Yeah.
That is her. I could pick her out of a lineup.
Totally. It's cool. It's really cool. It's not always like that, and it doesn't always have to be like that, but they really nailed it.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Okay, so the Path of Hate. This one was pretty cool that it was set during the New Republic. Again, with the shifting timelines, to me, it doesn't even matter because they make such a clear. It was very clear when this was set, because I think they say it at the very beginning.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yes, the New Republic. Here we are. Like part of the driving action of this episode actually is about the new timeline in a lot of ways. So this was directed by Nate Villanueva, story by Dave Filoni, written again by Amanda Rose Muniz. So I thought it was really interesting to see the development and the change of Corvus through the eyes of Nadura as a character who used to be from Corvus and now is an ambassador of the New Republic. What did you think about all this?
The time jump is, I guess, what we can say now a hallmark of the Tales of the Jedi and Tales of the Empire. So it makes sense that we would have this jump into the New Republic era. And this beginning, the New Republic comes in so confident. And this is what Nadura says to Wing in the beginning. She says, "I'm here on behalf of the New Republic. I brought a petition to the Senate for Corvus to become a member planet. They are willing to accept. However, first you must step down and she says this to Morgan. She says, you must step down and relinquish your control of the local systems. If you will not comply, I will have to arrest you. Leave now. It's what the people want." And Morgan says, "And how would you know what the people want?" And I loved this little conversation because it's true. How would Nadura know what the people want? She hasn't been there in years. And of course, the people don't want Morgan to be ruling, but the New Republic comes in, and how is it any different from what the Empire did in the last episode, where they just come in and start taking raw materials? The New Republic comes in and, she's talking about a petition, and the Senate will accept it. You'll be part of the New Republic. But just sign this and, cross your T's and dot your I's, and it's all a done deal. The people of Corvus don't even know that the Galactic Empire has been defeated, right? And you're coming in here saying, well, that's done. Sorry you didn't catch up. But now there's this new government system and you should be a member planet. And again, there's a thin line between love and hate. There's kind of a thin line in these governments sometimes. And I think this is all kind of part of the narrative of how the New Republic eventually will also fall, just like the Republic did, back during the prequel era. And it was just, this conversation was kind of crazy, I thought, because how would she know what the people want? She just got there. Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think Star Wars has done a really good job, actually, of showing those blurry lines of like, what does it mean to start a New Republic? And it's, as an audience member, I am on the side of the New Republic, sort of implicitly, because I know that Morgan is doing no good for Corvus. We can see the factory burning in the background. But at the same time, I think that it's a valid point. How do you know? And again, with the just the Star Wars is like sort of complicated in that aspect, but then also uncomplicated in the way that this episode ends.
The one thing before we kind of leave this conversation between Nadura and Morgan, I did just want to go back to the fact that they don't even know that the Empire has been defeated. And we talk about this a lot on Skytalkers about the transmission of information and how people know what they know in the galaxy. And I thought actually Tales of the Empire touched on this a couple of times, especially in Barriss's episodes about like the reputation of the Jedi, which we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to her half. But I really I don't know if we've ever seen a planet like this that and that's not true. I'm sure we have, but I was really surprised to hear that they just don't get information. And if there are a lot of other planets like this, we talk about the Jedi fading into myth and how that happened actually over a pretty short period of time, all things considered in the galaxy, but how that could actually be possible. And I really liked this inclusion that, Wing has to admit that he doesn't even know what's really going on in the galaxy. And I was glad that they included that bit.
Totally. I feel like this entire episode really sets up what is going on in The Mandalorian when we're first introduced to Corvus and when we basically introduce live action Ahsoka. And that whole episode of The Mandalorian is so awesome, and it's so great. And we see the two people, The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, help this town eventually. But how did we get to the actual worst point where Ahsoka had to be basically the savior for the town? And this is where we get to that point, right? And something I just thought was really interesting is the line that says, "My world has been burning since I was a child. Why should this one be any different?" So there we go. I feel like that fully encapsulates her lust for revenge that we see in this entire Tales of the Empire for Morgan Elsbeth. And I think it's fascinating that the first episode of the Morgan Elsbeth story started with flames, her entire world going up in flames. And then this one also ends in flames. And it really does underscore the fact that we are fully descending down the path of the dark side with Morgan in a different way than we normally would for the Jedi or anything like that. But this is through the eyes and through the prism of the Empire, of power, of the fact that the nature is being completely burned, which of course, like, a phoenix can rise from it. And I think you could say that maybe that phoenix is Ahsoka or Din Djarin, who helps free Corvus. But at this point, we leave Corvus in flames.
Is the Phoenix Wing? Because he does his part in The Mandalorian.
True. He could.
Yeah. This line, though, from Morgan really is kind of her thesis statement. And I think it's important that it was kind of near the end of this episode. But I thought the very end of the episode with Wing and Nadora was so emotional. It was so sad, her running to the ship, the explosive on the ship, and him coming to her afterwards. And she says, "Be brave no matter how dark things get." And Wing says, "I can't." And she says, "You can. Help will come, but you must be ready to do your part. Even if it is small, you can make a difference." And it's such, I think out of context, it's such kind of a cheesy line, like, do your part. But it's very true. And Wing stays in Corvus with his people, and he continues to try and help them. And we hear Bo-Katan on the other side of the comm asking who's calling. And of course, we know that Bo-Katan talks to Ahsoka about this, and she eventually goes there. Then Bo-Katan tells Grogu and Din to go. So, all the pieces are falling into place. We don't know how much time has passed between all of these things, but I thought it was kind of a very emotional little moment at the end there. And Morgan crushing the comm saying no one is coming was so vicious. But of course, we know that someone is coming and that there is hope for these people and for someone like Wing, and that he is still going to be a part of this community and hopefully lead it to better days.
I think it's pretty cool that it's Bo-Katan on the other end. And it really just does connect everything in terms of the fact that Bo-Katan is the one who told Din where to bring Grogu, and Bo-Katan being the connection there, who probably told Ahsoka to go, and just kind of all makes sense. And it's nice.
Yeah, it is.
It's one of those things where it's like, oh, cool. That's neat.
Oh, looky there.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into Barriss.
Listen, big deal. You got another problem. Women always figure out the truth. Always.
All right, welcome to part 3, where we're talking about Barriss Offee. I think we've been really excited to talk about Barriss's story here because holy guacamole, it was very good. It was very dark. It was very light. It was everything in between. Star Wars fans have been thinking about Barriss Offee for a very long time. And I went back and I rewatched not all of her episodes in the Clone Wars, but I rewatched season 2 of the Geonosis, Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory, which Barriss is in Weapons Factory. That's our first introduction to her. And then I also watched Ahsoka, the last 3 episodes of Ahsoka's arc in season 5 of the Clone Wars, which is the Jedi who knew too much to catch a Jedi and the wrong Jedi. And this was a great little duology of these 2 arcs. I gotta say, I was basically live Snapchatting Charlotte the entire time I was rewatching these episodes. I was like, hey, do you remember this? Hey, this is what I think about this now. But I thought these were, just to kind of talk about, Barriss in these episodes before we get into Tales of the Empire, to have something from season 2 to juxtapose with season 5, just from the perspective of Ahsoka and the Jedi Order, and also Barriss, I thought was a really good comparison. Actually, to have that stretch of time between these 2 episodes in the timeline of the Clone Wars, I thought was really cool to kind of put them next to each other. But if you don't remember, you're unfamiliar, season 2 of the Clone Wars, Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory, was about the Jedi trying to destroy a factory on Geonosis that was going to be building more battle droids. And Ahsoka, or Barriss, and her master Luminara come to aid in this. And it's when Barriss and Ahsoka meet each other for the first time. And they turn out to be really good friends. It's a great story about trust, about Padawans and master relationships, which is something that we know Dave is very keen to talk about and explore in his stories. And she is kind of presented, Barriss, as the perfect Padawan. Ahsoka has a hilarious line where, Anakin doesn't think she's ready for this mission at the weapons factory. And Ahsoka is like, well, dependable Barriss will get us through. And
Dependable Barriss.
Dependable Barriss. It's very funny. Like, there's a maze underneath the weapons factory with 200 junctions in it or something like that. And Luminara is like, everything is chill. I've made Barriss memorize all 200 junctions. And Anakin and Ahsoka just kind of look at each other like, okay, wow, that's a lot. But she's very much presented as this prim and proper Padawan. And we see her in some other episodes. Like, I think the most well-known for you and I would be Brain Invaders. But we don't see her again really until season 5, when Ahsoka is on the run because she's been framed for murder and for attacking the Jedi Temple. And it turns out that Barriss has been the one framing her this whole time. And Ahsoka has maintained that Barriss is like her closest confidant and the only person she feels comfortable reaching out to while she's on the run, even more than Anakin. And, the end reveal that it was Barriss that had betrayed Ahsoka and the Jedi was mind-blowing at the time. I thought it'd be good to read the quote that Barriss says at the end of season 5 of the Clone Wars about why she decided to attack the Jedi Temple and frame Ahsoka for murder. She says, I did it because I've come to realize what many of the people in the Republic have come to realize, that the Jedi are the ones responsible for this war, that we've so lost our way that we have become villains in this conflict, that we are the ones that should be put on trial, all of us. And my attack on the temple was an attack on what the Jedi have become, an army fighting for the dark side, fallen from the light that we once held so dear. This Republic is failing. It's only a matter of time. And that was the last time we saw her. And you watch that and you know that she's right. That's what's so frustrating. We know that Barriss is right about all of this, but she didn't do it in the right way to talk about what was going on. And I think
also she blamed it came at the expense of Ahsoka.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of us have wondered, like, what would have happened to her after Order 66, and what would she have thought about the rise of the Galactic Empire in all of this? And now we finally have answers.
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like for years, when we've gotten a random Inquisitor with a helmet on, it's like, oh my God, is that Barriss? Like, is it Barriss? Even with the Ahsoka show, because of the fact that Ahsoka and Barriss had a sort of longstanding friendship, and that dynamic was really put to the test, obviously, when Ahsoka was on trial and everything. It was like, okay, who's under the mask? Is it Barriss? What if it's Barriss? Every time it's literally always been, what if it's Barriss?
Yeah.
And Dave Filoni's like, listen, guys, you just have to chill. We will see Barriss again. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, but I distinctly remember him being like, we have not seen the last of Barriss. So I think that fueled a lot of, oh my God, what if that's Barriss speculation.
Yeah, I think he
So
had mentioned that originally there was a version of the Clone Wars where Barriss died at the
mhm.
end, but they decided not to so that she could be used later in another story. And,
Here we
however
are.
many years later, here we are finally.
It's always like that. It's just always like that. Yeah, it's just like classic Clone Wars episodes. It's really fun to revisit, and, I can't believe we have this actually incredible story for Barriss. I think I texted you, I was like, "Did Star Wars just drop the 3 hardest episodes about redemption and love of all time? Like, what is going on?" I was genuinely shook. I was, like, staring at my ceiling for 30 minutes after that last one. It was so insane, but also so dark, so well written. There was so much silence, so much dread, so much fear. It was so good.
Yeah, it was really good. All right, let's get into the actual episodes though. So, episode 4 was called Devoted, which I love this episode title. Uh, Devoted, such a great word. And I love the title here. It was directed by Saul Ruiz, story by Dave Filoni, and it was written by Nicholas Anastasio. Very sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly, but this is the new writer that we've never seen write before in Star Wars, and he's an editor at ILM, which is a very interesting tidbit. So very excited to see Nicholas here writing for Star Wars, and this is a great episode. This is when we're talking about that Dante's Inferno divine comedy structure that Charlotte laid out. This is the purgatory section where Barriss is in purgatory, or I would say she's kind of still in her descent here too. We see a lot of her actually going further down into these different places and prisons and fighting places here. But it's her descent and purgatory, and it's basically her training to become an inquisitor. But we open with her in prison. During the events of Order 66. And the clone troopers outside say, just be glad you're not a Jedi anymore because tomorrow they won't exist. And then we see Barriss looking out her window at the destruction that is happening on Coruscant. And we also learn that she was serving a life sentence for her crimes against the Jedi Order, which I don't know. I don't know how long between season 5 and Order 66 there is, but it feels like she's kind of been in prison for a while.
Mhm. Well, I don't know. I feel like it's not that long. I think Star
Yeah.
Wars themselves have extended that time period from Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order to Order 66. But again, I just have to say, it would not be Star Wars Day without reliving the events of Order
In
66. It just
some
wouldn't
form
be.
or fashion.
It just wouldn't be. So yeah, happy Star Wars Day, happy reliving Order 66 and the trauma that comes with that. It's kind of crazy. I have to say, I just have to comment one bit about your comment about purgatory. So in the sort of Dante's Divine Comedy, Purgatorio really does symbolize like coming to terms with the sins.
Mm,
And I feel like that is
yeah.
what she's actually experiencing here. So I don't actually think it's her inferno. I think it's coming to terms with the circumstance in which she is in
Mm-hmm.
and dealing with that. So
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting though when you start these episodes, you're eventually getting to a much lighter, like almost physical place too. We really are when you see a Fortress Inquisitorius being built in this particular episode, everything in terms of the lighting is very dark, very mysterious, very
Mm-hmm.
blacks, reds, and blues, and like dark, stormy blues. And I feel like that really is indicative of like this dark place that we're in, obviously, like mentally. And then by the end of it, when we get to the Way Out episode, everything is very white, everything is bright. Even the cave is sort of spooky, but at the same time, we were starting in a lighter place, I guess. Yeah, I thought this one was really, really great. Devoted, I think. What do you think about that title? You made a comment about how much you liked that title. Why do you like it so much?
I think, we think of devotion as very romantic, very loving, but there is the flip side of it to obsession, I think.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of the Grease song, Hopelessly Devoted to
Oh
You.
god.
It's very cute, right? It's very sweet, romantic, but I think you can have it be a much darker kind of term as well. And I think what you said about Barriss kind of accepting her circumstances she's becoming devoted. It's her choice in here, or her opportunity, I guess, to become devoted to the Empire and to this path as an Inquisitor. And I think we see that devotion click into place by the end of the episode when she ends up fighting Dante and winning. And it's very clear that it's not what she wants, but she, like you said, she accepts it. There's only one way out, which is the title at the episode 6. But there's only one way out, and Dante isn't working with her; he's attacking her. So this is what she has to do. And Fourth Sister actually makes an appearance throughout all of these episodes, which the original actress for Barriss, Meredith Salinger, is back to play Barriss here, and then Raya Kilstedt is back as Fourth Sister to voice Fourth Sister, and she played her in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show as well.
Yeah, and the Fourth Sister, I think, was super mysterious, and you did not see a ton of her in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I think it was the first time. I could be wrong about this. I am not an Inquisitor expert. Every time Star Wars just keeps returning to the Inquisitors, and I feel like I don't know. I'm just like not an expert in it, and I don't remember all of them in the same way that a lot of other people do, you know. But what I do know is that you didn't really see this much of Fourth Sister. Her story had not been explored that much, and I think I'm grateful that we are doing that here.
Yeah, and I liked that they kind of set up that Barriss knew who Fourth Sister was, who her name while she was at the Jedi in the Jedi Order was Lynn Rakish. And she comes to Barriss in prison and says, "At your trial, you accused the Jedi of murder and treason. Seems like you were right after all." And basically tells Barriss that she has an opportunity for her. And the choice, if you can call it that, is really that Barriss can stay in prison, maybe be killed right then and there, or follow Lynn on this new opportunity. But similar to what we were talking about with Wing on Corvus about the transmission of information, I thought that this was a really interesting line here about the Jedi. They've been accused of murder and treason. It seems like you were right after all. And, thinking about if there was this growing sentiment against the Jedi throughout the galaxy, and especially at the capital like Coruscant, that the things that Barriss was noticing, the things that they actually discuss in the Martez sisters arc of season 7 of the Clone Wars about this loss of faith in the Jedi. And you can kind of really start to piece together how this narrative that Palpatine will be giving the galaxy of the Jedi trying to assassinate him, it probably confirmed a lot of things for people throughout the galaxy. And you can kind of start to see how the myth of the Jedi and what happened to them, how they were all destroyed and killed, how that would all kind of be accepted by people, and how that history would really be erased about who they were and what they stood for. And I think you can kind of see that in this conversation between Lynn and Barriss. So Barriss takes Lynn up on her offer. They go back to Fortress Inquisitorius, and we get to see the Grand Inquisitor again, which is great, and 2 other, I guess, Jedi Padawan, Jedi Knights, not really sure, that also have a familiarity with Barriss. And I thought this conversation was really interesting, where they're talking about, their training and what's coming next, and the Grand Inquisitor advises them not to leave their quarters. And again, there's this element of choice here for them. Like, they have the opportunity to leave, but I really wouldn't recommend it. But again, we know that there's not really a choice here. And that other, I think his name was Amar, the other Jedi that was there, he chooses to leave. And then we hear later that he had a bad accident, and it's just, you knew that was going to happen as soon as he left the prison cell. But he says that what the Grand Inquisitor is talking about doesn't sound any better than the Jedi. And I thought that was also a very interesting line of Jedi in the Order who don't like the Jedi, similar to Barriss. And how many of them are there?
Yeah, I was just thinking a little bit about what you said a little earlier about how, in terms of the transmission of information, and how people are quickly buying into the fact that the Jedi are evil and whatever, and how that sort of allows Barriss to feel closer to her identity as a Jedi, as we see full circle by the end of this show. And in contrast with Morgan Elsbeth, whose story is also about identity, but it's really driven by revenge in a selfish way. It's a real reversal here for Barriss in that identity, since the Jedi are rooted in selfless behavior, she only gets closer to that throughout her story. And I'm not saying that I don't know enough about the Witches of Dathomir to just fully outright say that like the Witches of Dathomir are like the opposite of the Jedi. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think it's an interesting exploration side by side of what a loss of identity can do to you, and how you might want to get closer to that when certain circumstances happen to you, and how you go about that. And one way from Morgan Elsbeth's stance is revenge, and then I think for Barriss here, she's sort of forced into trying to harness the dark side, right? And that doesn't feel good to her. I really liked the fight with her and the Grand Inquisitor, who was basically training her. And I think it's really interesting that the Grand Inquisitor didn't use a lightsaber, and he says you not giving into the dark side makes you predictable. And being a Jedi, all your moves are predictable. And when she does give into, it's sort of interesting because by the end, in episode 6 with The Way Out, she fights Lynn without a lightsaber, and basically says the same line of, Barriss says to Lynn later, when she's basically fighting the same way as the Grand Inquisitor, she says, your anger makes you predictable. And I think it's an interesting reversal, because basically the Grand Inquisitor is telling Barriss originally that her Jedi instincts make her predictable. But the ironic thing is that's not the case at all. By following the path of the dark side, that makes you predictable, because it is just the quick and easy way, like we always hear. It's not the stealth way. It's not the best way. It is the quick and easy way. And I thought that was an interesting parallel that was drawn.
Yeah. In each of these episodes, we see Barriss predominantly fight without a lightsaber. And what we were talking about earlier about the same action, but different intentions, and what it means for her character. And I thought it was interesting to see her kind of get I don't want to call it the upper hand on the Grand Inquisitor here, but at the end when she surprises him, I guess, when she force pushes him away, it reminded me of her at the end of the Clone Wars when she's caught by Anakin as the one who has framed Ahsoka, and she has Ventress's red lightsabers, and she tells Anakin that she thinks they suit her, which felt very kind of deliciously evil of Barriss to say something like that. And so I kind of wondered how they were going to do this transition when she kind of seemed to be accepting the dark side in season 5 of the Clone Wars, her saying that the red lightsabers suit her, to where we see her here, where it feels like she's had time to reflect while in prison, and also thinking about joining the Inquisitors and everything like that, of like what she tells Dante when they're in the fighting ring of, they're not going to kill us. They would definitely have killed you, Barriss. They would have killed both of you. But I thought that the fighting was really well done. And I like that it's this move that Barriss kind of keeps doing, but in every episode, she's doing it for a different reason and a different intention. And it is a marker of her character growth on her way to Paradiso.
I also thought seeing Vader was insane. The way that he was animated looked so real. It was almost like they copy pasted something I've seen before with Vader's introduction. But I think that there was such an evocative use of silence throughout this entire episode. Like, there's a lot of space given between every quote to really make you feel what was going on in Barriss's mind, the indecision, the fact that she was forced into a corner, the tragedy of it all. And just seeing Vader, I think it was just something really interesting was going on with the fact that Barriss then puts on her helmet in front of Darth Vader. And it makes you think of when Vader puts on his helmet for the first time. And that's a character that experiences redemption too. So upon second rewatch, it was like, okay, so here we go again. I guess you could make that parallel in its sense, but also There is that suffocation type situation when she puts on the helmet of like, oh, she's doomed into this life now. But again, with Star Wars, there is always a way out. And I just think that the story did such a beautiful job of showing that. And it fills you with so much dread, but then almost also so much hope at the very end of it. And yeah, just really cool.
Yeah, I think that the long stretches of pause really go back to what Dave was saying back in 2022 about these being tome poems, and that they specifically are created with that kind of space. And in a lot of ways, even though they are shorts, there is a lot of time that is created within these episodes of just visuals, of just that action, of just looking at the environments and what is happening. I think, and this reminds me of the moment in episode 3, to go back a little bit, when Morgan is talking to Nadora, and Nadora is talking all about, this is what the New Republic wants to do. And we get this long shot of Morgan looking at the fish in the fish pond on either side of her, a clear indicator that she's not taking anything that Nadora is saying seriously. But it's kind of this long moment of contemplation, I guess. And then I think it's really emphasized in episode 6 as well, when that's a 15-minute episode. It's one of the longer ones in Tales of the Empire. But the first 3 minutes are really, and I looked, I think it's about 3 minutes, is of the family going through the snowstorm in order to get to Barriss, the healer, the wise mother. And 3 minutes is a long bit of story in a 15-minute short. You know what I mean? And so I think this quietness, the darkness that we see here in Devoted, and it's all meant to be, it's all intentional and meant to be contemplative.
I totally agree. I feel like we should move on to Realization, episode 5, which is directed by Stuart Lee, story by Dave Filoni, written by Matt Michnovitz. Is that how you say it, Caitlin?
Yeah, Michnovitz.
Okay, written by Matt Michnovitz. This one I think was... So I thought the other one was dark. When I was texting Caitlin, I was like, whoa, you weren't kidding. She was like, just wait. And oh man, did I wait? And it really was so much darker. My jaw was on the floor for all of these, to be honest. But damn, what did you think?
This one shook me to my core. I think out of the 3, this one, I'll just jump ahead to the ending. Yeah. I did not expect the ending at all of Barriss to reclaim her Jedi identity and push Lynn off the cliff. I mean,
right.
In another force push, like, oh my God. It was crazy. And the whole battle at the end with the other Jedi up there, the Jedi in hiding, it was so beautiful. And I don't want to get ahead. I'll take it back to the beginning of the episode. But Barriss and Lynn are together. They're following intel about hunting more Jedi. And they get to this planet, and Barriss's first instinct is to talk about how she says, these people have nothing. How can the Empire allow this to happen? And Lynn says, they reap what they sow. When the people show loyalty to the Empire, they will be allowed to flourish, but not before. And Barriss responds, then let's complete our mission and allow them to prosper. And this is just... I think when I saw the episode title of this, Realization, I think I knew that Barriss would have her come to Jesus, for lack of a better word, about what it is that she is involved in now and where she's kind of trapped. I don't think I expected her to escape, to push Lynn off a cliff.
To break out, totally.
Yeah, to break out. But I think that episode title of Realization, it really sets the stage for Barriss's headspace throughout this, and how it is slowly her realizing that there isn't any hope for her to actually be making meaningful changes in people's lives on this path that she's on as an Inquisitor.
I mean, if you think about her using a bomb to try to blow up the Jedi Temple in hopes that it would shed light on the injustice that was happening within the Jedi Temple, and how like there was such a war that it was pointless to be fighting happening. And then here she is being told that she has another avenue, and then they say this is a new empire, this is going to be, you're going to be a big part of it, you're going to help I don't know what they tell the Inquisitors, but you're going to help the big guns, I guess. And here she is like, wait, we're in this town that has nothing. How is this even possible? Like all I hear is how wonderful the Empire is. How is this the case? And then the answer is, well, it can't be the case until we complete our mission, which is killing a Jedi, And I think that for her, it reaffirms how she's very othered in this entire organization, and also just sees the complete injustice that's happening here. And I just think that this was really violent, like really violent, and the fact that she is able to talk to a child who gives up the location of the Jedi, and the child only really wants to talk to her with the helmet removed. So we have an unmasking that happens after the previous episode of the mask going on. Like the immediate unmasking is like very clear that she's getting softer, she recognizes the fact that with the mask off everything is softer. Child gives it away, and instead of sort of blaming the child, like no one in the townspeople is like, oh no, like I can't believe you did that to the child. But still they all suffer because Lynn says that they lied, and they lied about hiding a Jedi who's up in the mountains. And we see an insane massacre. I mean, it was very, very violent. And the fact that then Barriss is like, just don't look at it. You cannot look back. And I thought there was an interesting reversal of Barriss telling the young child, who has to be the same age as like young Anakin in The Phantom Menace. He kind of looks like Ben Solo, gonna be honest. He basically, Barriss says, don't look back. And it just reminded me of the whole be brave and don't look back. And it was an interesting reversal of like, don't look back, continue forward. But instead of be brave and don't look back that we hear in The Phantom Menace, which is don't look back at your mother as you leave home, it was don't look back at like the destruction that just, wrought in your town by my master at this point. So really rough, really, really rough.
Yeah, I felt so bad for this kid because Barriss, when the child tells Barriss where the Jedi is, she says, you did the right thing for everyone. And then immediately after that is when Lynn kills them all. And, that, and I just found myself thinking about that child growing up, and I felt so terrible for them. I would also say that visually, we've got the burned trees, which visually have a big similarity to Corvus, which I thought was an interesting parallel between these two halves of Tales from the Empire. And then we have them climbing up the cliff, up the mountain. Barriss says, as Inquisitors, we bring order, not chaos. And she also says, creating fear turns people against us. And Lynn says, they were already against us. Now people who fear our strength will respect it. And again, we're just kind of really emphasizing the differences between Lynn and Barriss and how they're approaching these situations. Barriss comes at it immediately by wanting to make sure that they, do what has to be done. But we want to make it so that these people are cared for and that they prosper. And she's still coming at it, I think, from the idea that the Jedi are dangerous people, and that the Jedi would actually not help the people on this planet prosper and have a better life. But through this journey on this planet, she's seeing that that's not true at all. And we have a big rock tumble, an avalanche, and she's kind of thrown further down the mountain. And when she gets up on top of the mountain, she sees that Lynn and the Jedi who was hiding up there are already fighting in truly kind of a stunning lightsaber battle with the
Absolutely
fog and the red and blue lightsabers. It really reminded me of Vader versus Obi-Wan in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And there's like a huge emphasis on the color of their lightsabers in this fog. And that fight is a former Jedi versus a Jedi. And that's what we have here too. So I thought that was a cool comparison between them. But when the Jedi gets the upper hand on Lynn, Barriss joins in the fight. And we have this truly incredible conversation between them. Also worth mentioning that this Jedi, I believe, is non-binary. They use they, them pronouns throughout this episode. And the actor who plays the Jedi isn't given a name. they're just called the Jedi in the credits, is Rye Chase, who is also non-binary, which I thought was a great inclusion here in this episode. And I thought that the emotion that this Jedi, just the emotion in their voice talking about how lonely they were, I thought was so good. It really made me feel something.
Yeah. It really sold the fact that
Yeah, that they were going to give up
the
or put
exactly, and
down
these
their
Jedi are on the
lightsaber.
run. Yeah, these Jedi who survived Order 66, who were off on their own, who didn't get the transmission from, I don't know, anyone like Bail Organa or anyone who's like part of a rebel organization. They feel so alone. It was so sad to me
Yeah.
and just like so helpless. And I felt like that this honestly, like this really short scene really packed a punch in terms of like, wow, this must be so hard.
Mhm.
And just like you said, like they were willing to give up. They were about to give up.
Yeah, when they said, "I'm so tired, and I feel so alone." And even okay, so the whole conversation is, "You're a traitor." The Jedi says, "You're a traitor and a murderer." That's not true. And they say, "You expect me to believe you." And Barriss says, "The Jedi are gone. They paid for their hubris, but you don't have to. Set down your weapon. Come with me." No. I know what it's like to be lied to be deceived, but that is over now. Turn yourself in. You have a chance for a new life. No. And then Barriss says, "Aren't you tired of running?" And they respond, "I'm so tired and I feel so alone." And the fact that this Jedi keeps saying no to every offer from Barriss, but you can hear in their voice as they're getting more emotional and more beat down about it. I thought that this actor Rye just did such an incredible job. I
Right.
really felt the change between those two no's in the emotion that they were conveying. And yeah, like you said, I thought this battle just packed such a punch, the whole sequence. And then, they both take down their lightsabers, and then Lynn murders them. And oh my god, I was so shocked and so sad. Yeah, and then, Barriss says they were about to surrender, and Lynn says it's irrelevant. The Jedi are to be eradicated wherever they are found. And Barriss says, then you have one Jedi left to deal with, and pushes her off a cliff. And I had to rewind it. I was so surprised and so shocked. And then she goes back to the Jedi and says, "I won't let you die. You're not alone." And it
The Raylo vibe was so unreal. I feel like the acknowledgement of the Jedi feeling alone and then acknowledging that Barriss herself is a Jedi,
yeah,
right? And then I feel like at this point in Barriss's journey, she's embracing love.
yeah,
And immediately, like when we see her hand on the Jedi, my thought was like, oh my God, are we about to enter a healing vibe? Because I think
yeah,
that's what we were thinking. That was the intention, I think, about around using "You're Not Alone," is because as a Star Wars fan, we immediately think about Rey and Kylo, who's who basically end with healing each other. And that is sort of, it feels like that's what's happening here. And then we get a confirmation of that essentially in episode 6. It was just like, wow, 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 wow,
yeah.
wow, wow,
And
wow.
the way that we don't know what happens to them, to the Jedi, if they lived or not.
I feel like we do know. I mean, we don't. It's ambiguous, but I feel like given the next episode, I
Yeah, she's
think
a
the
healer.
glass is half full. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I feel like she now has started a career.
A career. She's a
A
career
career.
woman now.
I know. It's like her 9 to 5 is being a healer. I'm just kidding. But she basically has been part of what I would assume maybe she's part of the path. It's a significant amount of time has passed. She looks a lot older when we get to episode 6, The Way Out. And she did mention maybe a friend helping them along the way. And I would assume that friend is Ahsoka. Who did you think that friend was?
I thought it was Ahsoka.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
Ahsoka, right? And I think just that concept of like her getting more in touch with what it means to be a Jedi, like a different type of Jedi, I guess, is something that so many people who were previously Jedi were dealing with around this time, and she's no exception. And so episode 6, The Way Out, is directed by Nate Villanueva, story by Dave Filoni, also written by Matt Miknovitz. And this episode was a masterclass to me. I think it was absolutely perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I think just by doing this time period jump of seeing her really embracing sort of spirituality, I guess, and being a beacon for people who are confused and scared for her. Again, I think this really is her embracing radical love, and it is her fully in that paradiso part of the metaphor that I was saying before about Dante's Divine Comedy, and how she really has found basically nirvana in figuring out who she is. And I think if you even want to use the hero's journey metaphor, this is a point in Barriss's life where she has returned with the elixir, which I think is love and healing. And the elixir is her being a healer. And I think doing force healing, honestly, is perhaps one of the greater contributions to new canon in the past 10 years. I think it's really great, and I think it really underscores like the light side of the force and everything. I thought the music in this part was so amazing. There's a really solemn violin that plays. There's, like I said before, I think there's a lot of pieces of silence in all of these episodes, but starting off in the blizzard and ending in the maze, the labyrinth, I think it was just brilliant. I don't know.
Yeah, the music in the labyrinth stood out, especially because they have that
Yeah.
choral component to it that was just, oh, you said this episode was a masterclass, and I totally agree with you. I think it was just, like I mentioned before, we've got a solid kind of 3 minutes of this family traveling through the blizzard in order to find Barriss. And we have the reveal that this is Barriss. Time has passed. She's older, which I'll also add, it doesn't really look like Lynn has aged. Was that just me?
Yeah, I noticed that too, but then I'm like, species. You just
Yeah,
never know.
I know. I guess I was like, because yeah, again, even though I shouldn't, I was trying to think of what our time period was here, and I was like, yeah, Barriss looks way older, and Lynn does not. And I think I kind of assumed that Lynn was inherently older than Barriss, but I don't know. What do I know? Not a lot here, anyway. But when the family arrives to Barriss, to the healer, to the wise mother, as her helpers call her, we get to hear a little bit about, that the Empire is still out there checking children's blood, which that's a huge part of Star Wars these days. And she talks about how the Jedi took her. And I love that we get this little bit of exposition about Barriss's perspective on the Jedi. And I guess I should say her life's path, where she says, "It was the Jedi who came and took me. They trained me as their own. I saw amazing things, traveled the stars with my master before darkness took me. But that was long ago." And you've kind of been hinting at this or discussing this, but about identity. And I think it's actually a great comparison to Ahsoka. And I love the idea that the old friend that Barriss references here is Ahsoka, because the conversation that the two of them would have in an original
Yes.
trilogy timeline, which is kind of where I'm
Yes.
putting this episode, I think would just be so incredible, because the definition, the moniker of Jedi has been honestly kind of a hot button issue with Ahsoka specifically. She says she's no Jedi in Rebels, but then we see her really kind of grapple with this identity in the Ahsoka show and the teachings of the Jedi and what she kind of chooses to take with her and what she chooses not to, and how she's going to be a master to someone like Sabine, who's not really a Jedi in the same way that she was a Jedi Padawan. And so I think that Barriss has kind of, I feel like they would have just had like some really long chats at a coffee shop about like, who are we and what does it mean to be a Jedi? And I think, you commenting that that force healing is kind of a really great inclusion into canon these days in the past couple of years. I think that aspect of the Jedi that Barriss has taken in, and the fact that she's fighting without weapons, these are so inherent of the qualities that I think Barriss wanted the Jedi to always emulate. And I think someone like Ahsoka in the Ahsoka show, something we talked about with that show is kind of the moments you can't not fight and the moments you choose not to fight, and how those are different things. And Barriss, I think Barriss might look at it a little differently. Like, again, we see her fighting without a lightsaber here, but she's still engaging in the conflict with Lynn. I don't know. I think it's very, I love thinking about the two of them and the fact that they both survived in these time periods, and there's a possibility that they could have reconnected. Just great food for thought, ample opportunity for a great episode of something in the future.
Mhm.
And I hope we get to
Absolutely.
see it.
Totally, totally, totally agree. I think if we can just sort of jump to the fact that Lynn arrives and then they're
Mhm.
forced into the cave, I think the cave represents a lot of things. First off, there is such a clear understanding by Barriss and her helper and the family that's there that they will understand and know how to get out of the cave. What their main obstacle is the darkness that is following them, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think without if Lynn didn't follow them into the cave, I think they would have been like, this is fine, right?
Yeah.
And what happens with Lynn, though, I think that it's a really good like physical metaphor for showing how she's like quite literally lost.
Yeah.
She has lost the plot in terms of why she's there. She's lost like who she is. She's lost her identity, unlike Barriss, who has regained it and found it.
Yeah.
I think when Barriss sort of appears as this disembodied voice when Lynn is lashing out, and she says, "You know the way out. You just have to accept it, Lynn." Lynn goes, "Stop calling me that." Barriss says, "That is who you are." Lynn says, "There is no way out, is there?" And Barriss says, "That's what the Empire wants you to think." And I think this goes straight back to perhaps even that first episode of Tales of the Empire about how Morgan is on her own path that she set for herself. And I think this is, you can kind of copy paste that, because what's happening with Lynn is that she's on her own path that she already set for herself too. And that is a path of arrogance, of anger, of fear, purely fear. And what Barriss is trying to make her see is that there is always a way out. You just have to let fear not be your master. And that's what she says. It seems fear is not your ally, but your master. And that's the mistake that all people who join the dark side face, is that they think that they can master their fear and have a complete arrogance over everything that they fear. You saw that with Anakin when he feared his wife dying, but instead it absolutely took him over, right? But here, I think Barriss then recognizes that Lynn has completely lost that part of herself, and she just needs to have a conversation about it. And unfortunately, when fear continues to be her master, she lashes out and physically hurts and kills Barriss at this point. And it's her fear that did that. What's great is that Barriss really believes in her to the very end. And then Lynn takes that and leaves the lightsaber behind and brings her out of the cave and knows the way out. It's so good. It's just like, it's genuinely so amazing, because the concept of the question, there is no way out, is there? That's what the Empire wants you to think. And then it takes basically a sacrifice and then a realization that Barriss has already had, but Lynn had to give. She had to have the time in order to have that realization on her own too. But I think this really just underscores about how your path can change no matter what. And she's lost in the center of the maze, but she's able to get out of it by embracing, like I said before, like radical love and healing. That healing is for herself too, over what just happened, and also just like that self-discovery and identity rebuilding that comes with understanding that, yeah, the Empire does want you to think that there's no way out, but guess what? Lynn found a way out, and it came at a price, but it was a beautiful story.
Yeah, and I think Barriss knew that this was how it was going to end. When she sends the family away and her helpers talk about coming back to get her, and Barriss tells them, no, you keep on, you take what I have taught you and pass it on to others, which is a lot of Last Jedi vibes, I think, in this episode, particularly with the cave. I really was thinking a lot about Rey in the cave. Of course, we have Luke in the cave as well. But they are places of transformation and confrontation too. And I think that's what you were talking about with Lynn and Barriss. And this confrontation Lynn has to deal with herself and what path she's going to take now. And I love when the first thing Barriss says after she's been, stabbed by Lynn's lightsaber is, "I forgive you." And Lynn is still, coming from a place of fear of, I don't want your forgiveness. I just want to find the way out. And it's not until, she has what you were talking about, more of that conversation with Barriss, that she's able to leave the lightsaber and find a way out of the cave. And I really can't add any more than what you were saying. I thought you did a good job discussing this section, but I thought it was just absolutely beautiful. And the time in the cave, from the tension of Lynn and the family in the cave, I thought was great, and how it was clear the family had the upper hand, to then Barriss's voice throughout with the choral arrangement by the Kiner family, and her actually being there the whole time behind Lynn. It all clicked together so perfectly, and kind of such an amazing episode of Star Wars animation.
We are so lucky. It's
Mhm.
unreal. The fact that we have 6 amazing explorations into characters that I actually would never thought that we were going to get little animated shorts about. And they're such interesting stories that we could spend 2 hours discussing. It's just so cool. And the animation could not be better. And just the emotions that I felt at the end of this, I felt so grateful that this existed.
Yeah, me too. And I think one of the last things I kind of wanted to talk about was this cyclical nature of these stories, or rather the parallels between them. We started in episode 1, Path of Fear, with the matron of the Mountain Clan, in which, a woman leader, a mother figure, and we end episode 6 with Barriss as the wise mother. And I thought that was a good bookend to Tales of the Empire, to have these two mother figures and what they're kind of doing in those positions of influence and power, and how with the matron we end it with Morgan on the path to fear, and then in this episode we end it with Barriss leading Lynn off of the path of fear. And I thought that was really beautiful and well done.
I completely agree. Ugh, so good.
So
what an
good.
amazing set of episodes. We're so lucky. Happy Star Wars Day. It's so good to be a Star Wars fan.
It really is. Are there any little tidbits that maybe we've forgotten to mention?
I'm sure, but I don't have any at this point.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, I guess I have one thing. I love that little creature at the end of this.
Oh, he was so cute.
So cute. I love a cute creature. And I
Yeah.
think that really signifies life continuing.
Right.
Because we see so much burning nature in the Morgan episodes of just like absolute destruction. And we end with a nice little cute creature.
A
who's
cute little
thriving,
guy.
living in a blizzardy tundra condition.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap up our discussion here about Tales of the Empire. These were so good. I can't wait for Tales of the Senate, whatever is coming next.
Not the Senate.
The Tales
Bounty
of the Senate.
Hunter. Sith. I think those are, if I was going to,
Yeah.
maybe
I
they're going
know.
to come out with something like completely surprising and just do like Tales of the Jedi 2. But
Yeah.
I feel like Tales of the Senate is really far down the road.
That's probably true. But
you know what that is? You know what energy Tales of the Senate is?
What?
It's George Lucas 100% funding it. That's the energy.
It is, and we would eat it up. It'd be so
I know.
good. I love
because
your
it would be
idea
like it would be amazing.
of Padme Palpatine. It'd be so great. They're both debating in the Senate about the same topic, and so the first 3 episodes are Padme's preparation and debate, and then the next 3 are Palpatine and his preparation. I mean, it writes itself, guys.
I know. Well, one thing that the Padme books did pretty well is establish Palpatine as a direct foe to Padme. And I think that through line is in the movies, but it's not as strong as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that through line is in even the Clone Wars too, but I think it could be stronger. And it would be interesting to pair them together.
All this to say is that I hope we get to hear about the next chapter of Star Wars Lucasfilm animation really soon. And the all of animation is incredible, but the short format story that we've gotten with 2 seasons of Visions now, and now 2 seasons here with Tales of the Jedi and Empire, they're just incredible. And I hope we continue getting these vignette type of stories, these anthologies and things like this, and just this different exploration. I said it at the top of the show, but I love the structure of comparing 2 characters and seeing why would we put these 2 in something like Tales of the Empire or Jedi. So I hope we continue to see more of it. continue to see new writers and new directors coming up in through Star Wars, Lucasfilm animation. Give me more, please. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please let us know what you thought of Tales of the Empire and what your favorite set of episodes was or what you got out of it. We would love to hear. You can find us on Twitter, X at SkyTalkersPod, or our personal handles. Mine is at Caitlin Plesher and Charlotte's is at Crarity. We also have our website, skytalkers.com, our Instagram, TikTok, all really good places to find us. And if you have a couple seconds and would like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or share that you're listening to the show in real time and tag us on your social media platform of choice, we would love to repost and reshare that as well. And if you're interested in other ways to support us, you can head on over to our Patreon and check out our different reward tiers there.
I want to say a huge thank you to these patrons: Koval, Jeff, Kate, Catherine, Maggie, King, Brad, Anna, Danny, Rachel, Tim, Kelly, Patrick, Christopher, Stefan, Colton, Anders, Mercedes, Logan, Matthew, Paul, Fio, Pio, Molly, Lindsay, Arzu, Blast Points, Matt, Steven, BJ, Talia, Talking Bay 94, Alex, and Aaron. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.